Hello, and welcome to What Mary Knew by Heart. I am going to start by explaining this seminar format for those of you who are joining us live. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see that there's a chat function, which you can click on, and then you can say hello to everyone who's joining us live, which represents over 30 countries from around the world. So feel free to click on the chat option, but you also see a Q&A, and that's going to be for at the end of this class. The last 20 minutes I'll dedicate to question and answer, and Emily, my support system here for this course, is going to be gathering questions all throughout the lecture and then text them to me so I can address any questions we might have. So first I want to, okay, Emily sent me the heart, so it means everything is working. So for those of you also who are only going to be watching the recording, because we have many members of this community are asleep right now on the other side of the world. And so if you're watching this by recording, just know that you can reach out to me and Emily at questions@meganwatterson.com. So if and when you listen to this lecture in your own time and you have questions you want to make sure that I address, just email them into that email address. And during this lecture, if you have any technical issues, please just email at questions@meganwatterson.com. Okay. So first I want to extend my profound gratitude for the response in this material. This material is my life and my life work and my calling. To have the response that I have seen over the past couple years since Mary Magdalene Revealed was published has been a dream come true and has given me so much hope and excitement about what I collectively refer to as the House of Mary Magdalene, which is the way that I describe this community as the House of Mary Magdalene. So first, let me say that this community represents El Salvador, Australia, Austria, Brazil, Canada, Colombia, Costa Rica, Denmark, Estonia, Taiwan, France, Germany, Iceland, Ireland, lots of ladies from Ireland, Italy, Mexico, Netherlands, Switzerland, Sweden, Spain, Portugal, New Zealand, United Arab Emirates, United Kingdom, United States. So we are a global community, and at the heart of this community is mercy and the practice of what it means to be able to connect to what we know so that we can move in the world from a place of that direct experience. Today's class is going to focus primarily on chapter 7 from the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. I prefer Dr. Karen King's translation of her gospel because she contextualizes Mary's gospel in such a profound way, which I will also go into today before we go into chapter 7. This is the translation I prefer. It's absolutely profound, and it also has the translations, it has the actual fragments of Mary's gospel, because we have 3 fragments and it contains all 3, and a difference between the Coptic and the Greek version. So for those of you who are a geek theologian like me, you may prefer this translation as well. So let me introduce myself for those of you who saw What Mary Knew by Heart and then just signed up for this course not knowing who I am. I'm a feminist theologian, and I have had training at both Harvard and Union Theological Seminary. I consider myself a feminist theologian because I look for the texts that were excluded from the original formation of the Bible, texts that to me validate and confirm what I have known by heart, which is an understanding of Christ as a liberator, Christ as a embodiment of love that each of us, no matter who we are and no matter who we love, have the capacity to practice. And so this work is my devotion to that knowing that I had before I went to church, before I went to college and graduate school. I knew as a little girl, the experiences I had, the direct encounters I had with what I would refer to as Christ was of a great big unsayable love, a love that never ends, a love that is truly an unspeakable joy, and a love that when we can learn how to always return to it, even in the midst of the most traumatic and difficult times in our lives and in the world, when we can learn how to return to the heart, return to that great big unsayable love, we can move in the world in a way that is in alignment with justice, is in alignment with practicing what I believe the first century and second and third century Christians before the Bible was created, before the formation of the institution of the church, I believe these early Christians practiced a form of loving, a form of knowing love, a form of practicing embodied love. And these texts that we're going to study in this course, for me, were the breadcrumbs and the validation, the affirmation of what I knew innately from within. So we're going to begin with a lecture for about 50 minutes, and then we'll do a 20-minute meditation, what I refer to as a soul voice meditation. And then we'll do 20 minutes of Q&A towards the end of this class. So let's begin with the 3 breaths. Now, this is a very deceptively simple practice, and it is the core of what we will practice when we get to the soul voice meditation later in this class. The 3 breaths is an intentional practice that we can utilize at any point all throughout the day. And it's actually going to be a part of our homework between this Sunday and next Sunday, is to practice the 3 breaths at least once a day. It's deceptively simple because we can do it at any point. We can do it all throughout the day if we want. We can do it when someone's screaming at us. We can do it when we're having a panic attack, which is something I encounter several times a day. We can use this practice as a form of reclaiming our power, reclaiming our time, reclaiming how we are going to choose to exist and show up in the world. So it's deceptively simple because no one else has to know that we're doing it. We can do this at any point, and we always have the right to claim the time and the space to practice the 3 breaths. But why it's so deceptive is that it just takes 3 breaths. It just takes 3 seconds, and yet it can reorient us. It can help us return to the body, which is the soul's chance to be here. It can help us return to the heart and then respond to whatever we may be encountering. We can respond instead with love, or we can respond at least with a new a new action, a new word, a new voice, rather than those habituated reactions that have been ingrained in us when we encounter something that's confronting. So let's practice the 3 breaths right now to get us centered and to get us into a state where we can really approach this sacred text of Mary's gospel with a sense of curiosity and wonder and revelation. So just close your eyes wherever you are in the world right now, whenever you're listening to this. Close your eyes. Give yourself this space, this time, this chance to exist intensely. And all you're going to do is set the intention for this first breath to descend into your heart. Take your first intentional breath. With that breath, we return. We disengage from anything happening outside of us, anyone's voice, any issue or conflict that we've internalized. So any voice even that's coming from within us that is causing us suffering. Then we're going to take a second intentional voice from this place of feeling more rooted and grounded in this body, this chance for the soul to be here. Take a second intentional breath. With this breath, we connect to the ancient knowing of our inherent worth, the ancient knowing of the great, big, unsayable love that is right here inside of us, that we do not have to prove we are worthy of, that we do not have to do anything in order to receive. All we need to do is be present to it. Then we're going to take a third intentional breath. And with this third intentional breath, you simply begin to open your eyes and feel that sense of being rooted and connected still to the heart. So then you move throughout your day in a more grounded way, anchored to this eternal love that's right here within. So let's start with what I refer to as the power of knowing. The power of knowing begins with an understanding of the Greek word gnosis. The Greek word gnosis is loosely translated into English as knowledge or wisdom. But what's lost in that translation is the understanding that gnosis isn't talking about what we can learn or accrue through simple repetition or memorization. Gnosis is not referring to what we can read about and then know, or what someone can tell us about and then know. Gnosis is talking about direct experience. So gnosis is knowledge that we have acquired directly from our own personal lived experience. The reason why this is so critical that we understand the difference between those two, because knowledge is so revered and so held up in our world, in our culture, as it should be. Education is fundamental and education is so critical. But what happened in the elevation of the importance of education, of becoming an expert or erudite and an academic around whatever it is you will be teaching, when all of that was held up as and revered as critical and important, unfortunately, what got left in the shadows was the direct experience, what we each can know and experience from within. So knowledge is one thing, but then gnosis is another. Gnosis is what we do not and actually cannot be taught and told from anyone else. And so the power in it is that if I know something directly from within me, then no one outside of me can distract me or disrupt that knowing. No one can convince me or sell me something that I know is not true. So what we lost in raising up and elevating the idea of the mind, of knowledge, is we lost that equally important, critical form of knowing, which can only come from within and can only come from direct experience, can only come from the heart. This knowing, this gnosis, was at the core of what the early Christian communities, what some scholars refer to as the Christ movement. These are those that worshiped Christ and practiced what Christ had taught for the first several centuries after the crucifixion. So before the canonization of the Bible, which began in the 4th century, and before the institution of the church began, which was in the 4th century. So these early Christians, these members of the Christ movement, practiced what is now referred to as the kenotic path or kenosis. This is another Greek word that means self-emptying love. For some of us, that definition may not be, it may not help at all. Self-emptying love might sound confusing. So I like to reframe it as kenosis is an emptying out of the ego. So it's a release of the ego and a rising of the soul. So kenosis was a practice that these early Christians were engaged in, where they would become conscious of one of the 7 powers that's articulated in Mary's gospel. One of the 7 powers that they may be neck deep in, for example, the compulsion of rage, which is the 7th power, they would use this practice of releasing the ego. So they would become very, very aware of that particular egoic state that they were in this example, the 7th, anger. They would become very aware of the state of anger that they're in. And they would reach a state of being able to release that ego that is feeding, whatever story. Usually it's that a sense of having been hurt or harmed or wounded in a way where the ego is triggered into anger, into rage, into revenge. And what these early Christians would work on is that state of awareness of being in that egoic state of anger to such an extent that they're no longer existing in the present moment. So in Aramaic, the word for death is simply translates as existing elsewhere. That's a death, is existing elsewhere. And this practice, this kenosis, was a way of returning again and again to this body, to this heart, to this love, so that when we become aware that we are absolutely existing in this state of the 7th power, in rage, in anger, in a state of revenge or wanting harm to be done to this person who harmed us. We are not existing in the present moment. We are existing in that moment when we were harmed. We are existing in a state of the future, projecting ideas of what we wish could happen, or we're in the past, and we're not existing in the present moment. So we're missing out on the now. We're missing out on all the miraculous transformation that can happen when we're right here and present. This is really important to say, that there is nothing wrong, there is nothing at all ever sinful about being angry. There is a profound calling to be human. There's a profound calling to experience each of the 7 powers that exist within this experience of being human. Every time we become aware that we are in a state, an egoic state, like the 7th, like anger, it's an opportunity. So it isn't a failure to be human. It isn't a flaw. It isn't a weakness. It isn't something to overcome. The whole point is to be human. The whole point is to be fully here and to feel it all. So when we become aware that we're in this 7th power of the ego, it's an opportunity to practice non-judgment, right? We don't need to create a story. We don't need to feel shame. We don't need to judge the fact that we were enraged. We can allow love to reach where it hasn't been before. We can allow love to be what it is here for, which is to embrace, surround, overwhelm those moments when we become aware of just how human we are. And so then we can take that awareness of the fact that we had been existing elsewhere in one of these powers of the ego, we can take that phenomenal moment and choose to return to the heart. We can choose to release all those egoic stories about why we have every right to be angry, about how we wished we had never been harmed, about how we didn't deserve ever to be harmed. We can release all of those stories. So that we can be present again, so that we can exist intensely right here, nowhere else but right here. Because then we are connected again to that great big unsayable love that is going to guide us, that is going to heal us, that is going to assist us then in moving in a way forward from out of that egoic state, where we can be in service again, not to our ego or someone else's, but we can be in service to love itself. So for me, what was so exciting about encountering these early Christians and this concept of gnosis, direct experience, versus what someone is going to be taught, what someone has to be told or has to read about in order to know. What excited me so much about this concept of gnosis is that it is the single most powerful tool then to disrupt any hierarchy that exists in the world. So to contextualize, these early Christians were existing in the Roman Empire at a time when the hierarchical structures of power were very, very intense and ingrained, and were a part of a system that suggested that if you're here at the tippy top, which would be Caesar, there is no one and nothing above Caesar, not even God. Caesar is God. So there's Caesar up at the tippy top, and then there are those that are citizens and own land, men, only men. And then we work our way down this hierarchy of existence that the Roman Empire practiced and was deeply embedded into its entire culture and system of belief. And we get all the way down here to women and slaves, which were people who were considered to have no power and did not own land, did not own even their own children, did not have access to making laws or having a say in any part of the authority of this system. So the reason why that's really critical to think about in terms of these early first Christians is it helps us understand how absolutely radical they were. So these early Christians called themselves brother and sister, no matter where they were on the spectrum, on this hierarchy of power and existence according to the Roman Empire. So for example, Perpetua and Felicitas. Perpetua was a woman who was married to a man of power, so she had power through her husband. And then Felicitas was a slave, and the two of them were jailed. They were sentenced to death and put in prison because they referred to themselves as Christians, and because they refused to acknowledge Caesar as the ultimate power. They said that there is a power that's greater than Caesar. And what's so radical is that then they were saying this power exists within them equally, all of them. So even though Felicitas was a slave and Perpetua was not, they considered themselves sisters and equals. And we have documentation of when Perpetua and Felicitas were led out to be killed in an arena in a part of the Roman Empire. Perpetua yelled out to the crowd as she was being led out to her death, "Love one another." That was all she repeated. So that these early Christians, for the first 3 centuries, if they called themselves Christians, they were put to death. And the reason for this is because they sought to destabilize that system of power. They wanted the first to be the last and the last to be the first. They wanted each and every one of their community members to understand that there is an ultimate power that unites them all, renders them all equal, and that this power exists within them. So it doesn't exist in an institution outside of them. It doesn't exist in a Caesar, in an ultimate ruler. It exists in a profound, radical, unifying way within each and every one of them, no matter who they were and no matter where they had been placed on that hierarchy of existence according to the Roman Empire. So that practice of kenosis, of self-emptying love, that practice of returning to the heart and of releasing the ego to allow the soul to rise, that connected them in a radical way that was decentralizing power and destabilizing the entire understanding of what it meant to be in power, what it meant to have authority. So those that had authority were not people who, according to Christians, these early Christians, were not people who were in these, positions of highest external authority. The people who had true power were the ones who could return to the heart and to connect directly to this ancient, great, unspeakable power within them. Those were the true powerful ones. So let's move now into the Gospel of Mary and the way that all of this is articulated in one of the most phenomenal conversations, ancient conversations, in my opinion, that we have access to. It's the conversation that happens in Mary chapter 7 between her and Christ. And she's articulating a form of vision that she has access to. And the reason why it's so phenomenal is because it is giving us direct proof, direct evidence of this form of kenosis, this form of releasing the ego to allow the soul to rise. It's giving us actual scriptural evidence of this community that was most interested in each and every one of us having a direct connection to love from within us. So let's start with Mary 7, 1 through 4. Again, I'm reading the passages from Dr. Karen King's translation of the Gospel of Mary, but no one needs to have her gospel with you. I'm going to read it, and then this is a recording, so you can replay this if you want to hear this passage again. So this is Mary 7, 1 through 4. Mary said, I saw the Lord in a vision, and I said to him, Lord, I saw you today in a vision. He answered me, how wonderful you are for not wavering at seeing me. For where the mind is, there is the treasure. How wonderful you are for not wavering at seeing me. For where the mind is, there is the treasure. So this passage is our first experience with the word mind. Now, a lot of words get lost in translation, not just going from the Greek or Coptic into English or into whichever language you're reading the gospel in. It gets lost because of a cultural misunderstanding of what mind meant at that time. So this is before mind got divided, the body got divided into mind and heart in a way where the mind became superior, the masculine, the external became superior, the knowledge, as in what degrees you have, that all became superior, whereas the heart, the feminine, what we can know through direct experience, the body, that all was considered less, was considered not as reliable, not as trustworthy as what was mind. But that happened much, much later in human existence. So at this time in the first century, there is no division, there is no understanding that the mind is greater than the heart. And if we take that word directly from the Greek, that word that is translated then into English as mind, we have the Greek word nous, N-O-U-S. That word, if we directly translate it from the Greek, is more accurately described as the spiritual eye of the heart. The new is that aspect of our embodiment that allows us to perceive the soul, not once we die, but here in our human form. So the new, what Christ is saying here in Mary 7, 1-4, is that where the new is, where the spiritual eye of the heart is, there is the treasure. In Mary 7, 5-7, she now is asking, okay, how is it that I'm having this vision? Like, what aspect of me allows me to see this, allows me to encounter you directly from within me? So Mary says, so now, Lord, does a person who sees a vision see it with the soul or with the spirit? The Savior answered, a person does not see with the soul or with the spirit. Rather, the mind, which exists between these two, sees the vision, and that is what, ... So the ellipsis that happens after that passage is indicating the missing pages that occur directly as Christ is answering Mary's question about how we can receive a vision directly from within us, which I find so incredibly incendiary and so absolutely provocative and so telling. Because if we can know, if we can gnosis, if we can have direct knowing of the divine, of what we might consider or call love, the creator, Christ, however you may word it, if we can directly know that, then there is no power outside of us that can manipulate us, can distract us, or tell us what love is. We will know that, we will have that, we will be grounded in that ourselves personally. So we don't need that external validation. We can have a direct experience and encounter already within us. So the word mind in that passage in Mary 7, 5-7, Christ gets cut off, of course, for how exactly we receive a vision from within us. But Christ says, rather the mind, so the new, the spiritual eye of the heart, which exists between these two, so exists between the soul and the spirit, this is what sees the vision. How I have understood that, I've been studying this passage. It was my absolute obsession in divinity school and led me to the Hesychists, who were desert fathers, who also refer to this word new, the spiritual eye of the heart, in their practice. They are the ones who developed the prayer of the heart, and their sole objective in life was to gather all their consciousness, all of their focus back to the heart, and to enter into a state of theosis, which means a constant dialogue with the divine. So there's never not a moment when they aren't hearing from love directly. There's never not a moment when they can't just, with those 3 breaths, disengage from the outside world and return to the heart, and then be led by that encounter. So the Hesychists not only practiced this return to the heart, this prayer of the heart, where they are experiencing, encountering the new directly. They also wrote about it in the Sayings of the Desert Fathers. The Philokalia is a Greek text that has a compilation of all of these various hesychus and their experiences with the spiritual eye of the heart, with the new. What's so fascinating to me is that they were, of course, they were monks and they lived along the Nile in Egypt. And this is where we found the remnants of Mary's gospel. The three fragments that we have recovered were all along the Nile in Egypt. To me, I feel that it was most likely from those monastic communities that were practicing this ancient return to the heart, and that they refused to follow the edict that was sent out in the 4th century for all of the gospels that weren't included in the formation of the Bible. So gospels like the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, the Gospel of Philip, which we'll be studying next week, the Gospel of Thomas. These gospels, the Acts of Paul and Thecla. Thecla is another phenomenal example, like Perpetua, who practiced this early form of Christianity, this capacity to engage in a power that exists within us. And she refused to be married, and she became a teacher in the early Christ movement. She was a companion to Paul. She taught alongside Paul. And we know, of course, and have heard of Paul the Apostle, but very few have heard of Thecla. But she was as loud, as present, and as integral to the early Christ movement as Paul was. Her story, though, was erased. Her voice was erased. And part of that edict that went out was also to destroy the Acts of Paul and Thecla. So many of these documents were gratefully not destroyed. They were buried in urns in the desert and in caves. And so we have proof of these early Christians who practiced a form of being in the world that is so profound and so radical, precisely because it disrupts our understanding of where true power rests. True power rests for these early Christians and for all of us who studied these texts. It rests in the heart. It rests in being in a state of love, which is paradoxically, of course, the most vulnerable state we could ever be in. And it is the most receptive state we can ever enter into. It is a state of profound humility, because when we are in the heart, we have surrendered the ego completely. We have surrendered our own objective, our own ideas of what needs to happen and when. We have surrendered over what we think our plan is, or what we think somebody else needs to do. We have surrendered all of that over, and we are listening instead to this direct communion, this direct conversation between the self and the soul. So, and there is no hierarchy. The self is as important as the soul. That's very, very important to remember. Our humanity is as important as our divinity. Each are critical. Each are meant to be the whole. So this Greek word new, and my experience of wanting to practice it is how I formed the soul voice meditation, my encounters with these hesychus in Byzantium, and studying their writings and their experiences of directly connecting to the new, to the spiritual eye of the heart, and to this vision that is possible, this vision that we have in scriptural form in Mary's gospel, that Mary says that she received directly from Christ. This, to me, the way I like to describe it is the spiritual eye of the heart is like a bridge between our humanity and our divinity. So it's like a bridge between that ego, right, that we're meant to encounter, we're meant to become aware of, we're meant to experience. It's a bridge between the ego and the soul that is here to embrace our humanity with only ever more love. So the new is our, it's like a movie projector. It's like a microphone. We can go inward and then suddenly hear and encounter from within the heart and know directly, gnosis, not knowledge, gnosis, direct experience. We can have direct experience of the soul. We can hear, we can see, we can feel what it is the soul needs us to know in each and every moment. So what I want to move into now is the soul voice meditation. And for me, when Christ says, this is, how wonderful it is for you to not waver at seeing me. In my 20 years of practicing the soul voice meditation, I feel like I understand that comment because so often we are terrified to go inward. The heart does not feel like something that is, fluffy and puffy pillows and warm and cuddly. The heart can feel terrifying, can feel treacherous. Being still sounds easy, but being still and going inward and encountering what we actually know in each and every moment can also be extremely terrifying. It can be incredibly confronting because once we know as a gnosis, once we directly experience what's here inside of us, we then feel that sense of responsibility and culpability for seeing that knowing into action, moving what we know out into the world around us and the people around us. So we're called to a level of integrity by having this practice of going inward. We're called to the integrity of hearing what it is that the soul has to say and then living a life that's in alignment with it. And that is a profound privilege, and it's also a profound responsibility. So just know that some of us in our community will find this part of each of the classes for this course challenging, to go inward, to be still, to dare to have the courage to really hear what the heart has to say, what the soul wants you to know. So wherever you are, let's just get comfortable in our own skin. You do not have to sit in any particular way. You do not, I have a candle lit, but you do not have to light a candle. You do not need mala beads. You do not need anything in order to do this powerful practice. Just take a moment to be more fully present in this beloved body. The body is the soul's chance to be here. So whatever relationship you may have with your physical form, just try in this moment to coat yourself, to ease that relationship with the mantra, the body is the soul's chance to be here. Whatever it may be also, Let's repeat, the body is the soul's chance to be here. Using the imagination, which is our own inner apothecary. It is like having access to our own pharmacy inside of us to alter our state of mind, to release ourselves from any toxic thoughts that are surrounding us. Just use your imagination right now to allow yourself to be flooded with golden light, not just from the crown of your head to the soles of your feet, but also moving in and through your entire system, through your bloodstream, through every vessel, every ventricle, to the point where you feel that golden honey light just streaming out your every pore. And just feel what that is like, to be able to reclaim your space, to be able to reclaim this phenomenal moment of being here, of being alive, of being human. Now let's take our first intentional breath. Just allow the breath to be deep. Feel that sense of community. We are connected inwardly all over the world, throughout time and space. There are so many of us wanting this material, wanting these words from Mary, wanting this deep understanding that no one ever and nothing can take from us, this great unsayable love that exists within us. So with that first intentional breath, return to the heart. When you feel a sense of just slow, heavy presence, when you feel that sense of arriving, when you feel that sense of returning from all times and all places, when you feel that sense of just being fully here, take your second intentional breath. So allow yourself to encounter what it is to be present in this miraculous form. And I want us to ask a question inwardly, collectively together. Very simple, and also, as you know, very profound. Ask from within your heart, what do I know in this moment? I want you to repeat that question and listen inwardly, which means the answer may come in a vision, like Christ did to Mary. The answer may come with a voice, not an external voice, like the voice you're hearing right now that is mine, a voice that is devoid of sound, a voice that is the most dulcet and unceremonious and loudest because it is not insisting, loudest because it knows itself completely. Listen to that voice. And sometimes the answer comes with a rush or a flood of emotion. And it allows you, once you feel that emotion, to know what it is that you know by heart in this moment. So again, repeat. What do I know in this moment? And I'm going to hold us within for several minutes. I would love to stay here indefinitely. Sincerely, I wish I could just stay here. So let's begin to prepare to take the third intentional breath. I like to suffuse my entire system with gratitude. Whether we've heard an answer or not in linear time, the trust comes from a sense of kairos, which is soul time. What we ask within the heart will be answered. We will live into. When we seek inwardly, we will find. So let's give gratitude now, whether we've heard an answer or not. Let's trust in the process, this return to the heart. And let's give our third intentional breath to this meditation so that when you feel ready, you can begin to open your eyes. Mine feel like sealed shut. Begin to open your eyes. And for some of you that are new to the practice, what I recommend and what I love to do is to, because often going into the soul voice meditation can almost be like having a dream, having a vision. And you'll find that sometimes the answer feels incredibly vibrant as you're encountering it, and you think you could never forget it, and then you stand up and go to get a drink and you've already forgotten it. So for those of you who are new to the soul voice meditation, you may want to jot down just some initial impressions of what you encountered, even if it was just fear or that sense that we all go through of feeling like we're not doing it right, or feeling like, that the answer is never going to arrive. Just write down anything that you want to about what that experience was like. Or for those of you who are on live right now, feel free to comment in the chat what that experience was like for you, or what you heard in the moment that you know. And what's so powerful and important in that experience is that, or the reason why this is always an integral part of any course or class or retreat or workshop I will ever lead. I will always have us go inward to counterbalance the external, so that we are practicing a form of making certain that the knowledge that we are acquiring is only ever as important as the direct experience we are continuing to return to and to understand is equally important. Ultimately, I can't tell anyone what love is. I can't teach love. Love is a direct experience. Love is gnosis. Love is something that happens deep inside each and every one of us. And we cannot ever force that or control that experience of love, which is also what makes it so profoundly divine. Is it is not a human bond or tether or word or expression that incites it. Love is something that comes from within. And the power of that then is that love is also something that no one can ever take from us. No one can ever disconnect or disrupt that direct connection we will always have to the source of love itself within the heart. So now I want to move into what our homework is going to be, because I love homework. And before we go into the Q&A, I want to give us a little sneak peek of what next week will be. Next week, we're going to be talking about the Gospel of Philip, which is, as I mentioned, another one of the Gospels that wasn't included in the original formation of the Bible. And the concepts within it, like Mary's capacity to experience Christ directly, that concept wasn't integrated into the formation of institutionalized Christianity. And likewise, there are teachings within the Gospel of Philip that was not integrated into the formal formation of Christianity in the 4th century. And the reason why this is so important is because the figure of Mary Magdalene was transformed between the 4th into the 6th century, and really became set by the 6th century with Pope Gregory's homily 33, saying that the faithful should consider Mary Magdalene the penitent prostitute. And the process of editing her story from being the one who could know Christ by heart, the one who had visions of Christ directly, the one who did not waver at seeing him inside of her, her story would be transformed into being the penitent prostitute. And what also happened within the church was this separation of the virgin and the whore for the female body, both of which, and these ideas, the agenda behind this idea of making Mary Christ's mother, the Immaculate Virgin, and then making Mary Magdalene the penitent prostitute, what both of these extremes established is that women, the female body, was not fit for positions of spiritual authority. This is what that narrative established. And what's so fascinating about the Gospel of Philip, I read and I adore Jean-Yves Lelou. He's a French theologian, Jean-Yves Lelou. His Gospel of Philip It's Jesus, Mary Magdalene, and the Gnosis of Sacred Union. I love this book. And he includes a translation of the Gospel of Philip. For those of you who want to read this before next Sunday. However, for those of you who do not and want to have two quotes from the Gospel of Philip to just sort of sit with, maybe write it down in red somewhere, or whatever color is your spiritual color. Mine's red. And I want us to really sit with these two particular passages this week from the Gospel of Philip, because ultimately these two passages are going to help us with this effort of knowing what we know, of being able to return to the heart and being able to hear the soul. And these two passages really exemplify these missing threads of those early Christians, the Christ movement. They illuminate a different understanding of what it is to be human, of what it is to be embodied, of what it is to be male or female or intersex or any combination of the above. It articulates a very different understanding of our purpose here and of what it means to be a soul and what it means to be in a body. So these are the two passages. Also, I wrote down the page numbers because these quotes from the Gospel of Philip also show up in Mary Magdalene Revealed, my book, which I just came out in paperback this winter. So on page 59, this is our first quote from the Gospel of Philip that will be, I'm going to put this one up on my mirror in red with a red Sharpie. It's on page 59, or the chapter titled The Three Marys in Mary Magdalene Revealed, and it's from the Gospel of Philip. Love refuses nothing and takes nothing. It is the highest and vastest freedom. All exists through love. So again, this is going to be recorded so you can play this back and then write it down. And just, I like to marinate over passages. There's a formal title in theology for what we can practice. It's called Lectio Divina. And Lectio Divina is a form of meditation and practice. It's really just marinating over a text and really sitting with it and going inward around it and repeating it again and again, so that you're really hearing different things the more you repeat it. You're living into it, and you're allowing that passage to really speak to you and to inform you. Lectio Divina was something that only the monastics practiced, and I really love to practice it myself. So this is the homework that I want us to focus on, is the Lectio Divina, the meditating on these two passages. So the first is that one about love, page 59 from the Three Marys, and also page 101. This is probably my favorite passage from, these two are my favorite passages from the Gospel of Philip, but this one is incredibly profound, and we will go deeply into it in the next class. It's on page 101 from the chapter titled The Body Never Lies. And this is the other quote we're going to focus on next week from the Gospel of Philip. What you say in a body. You can say nothing outside this body. You must awaken while in this body, for everything exists in it. Resurrect in this life. Okay, so those are our two quotes from the Gospel of Philip that we're going to focus on next week. And aside from just really sitting with those two quotes, Okay, just making sure I'm still recording. Emily came on to the screen. So I have the questions that we can focus on now for this next part of the Q&A. She has texted me the questions. And for those of you who are not live, just email me in. Emily will collect any questions that come in this week for me to be able to answer and address for our next class. So whenever you listen to this between now and next Sunday, just email questions@meganwatterson.com and I'll be able to address those questions. So the other homework for this week also is to practice the soul voice meditation as often as you can. I would say once a day. And the best way to originally integrate it into our lives is to simply use the 3 breaths in something you've already habituated. So for example, brushing your teeth, do the 3 breaths, or while taking a shower. Something that you already do, so you don't have to try to carve out separate time. The point is to integrate this practice into our everyday lives. So feel free to just try that out throughout this week of doing the 3 breaths, which is really at the core of the soul voice meditation. Taking that first intentional breath to go into the heart, the second intentional breath to connect to the love, and then the third breath to surface and hopefully feel more connected. All right, so we have several questions that I want to address. How do you distinguish between spirit and soul? So this is a question that actually has come in very often, also all throughout since Mary Magdalene Revealed was published. Was that distinguished? How do you, because Christ in Mary chapter 7 says that the spiritual eye of the heart exists between the soul and the spirit. So first I want to say that the way that I experience something may be different from the way you experience something, and I encourage that. So first and foremost, I would want for you to have that direct experience, that personal gnosis of how you understand the soul and the spirit to be different, to be distinguished. For me, the soul is personal. The soul is us, is directly connected to the divine, but it's our soul. It's our personal soul. To me, the spirit is more collective. The spirit is something that moves through me and may inspire and influence my soul, but is more of a collective, whereas the soul is individually mine and my own. I have a soul and you have a soul. And there's a distinguishing aspect to those souls, even though ultimately our hearts are like walkie-talkies. When we are fully connected to the soul, we are also connected to every other soul in existence. So for me, the difference is that my unique soul is personal and is something that I have a unique way of expressing, and I have a unique sort of way of being in the world, a way of expressing that love. Like I have soul work to do in this world that differs from you, but we all may encounter the spirit in the same way. For me, spirit is very physical. I get those tiny, like the little arms on my hair all stand up in like standing ovation whenever I feel that sort of breath of spirit, that moment where my thoughts may shift or I may have an inspiration. Spiritus to me is very much like an experience from a collective good, whereas the soul is unique to me. And then the new, which is the bridge between the two, the bridge between it is neither soul nor spirit. The new for me, the spiritual eye of the heart, is that aspect within us that we can actually only access here while embodied. And it is our opportunity, our chance to encounter the soul now, while we still can, as a human being, we can bring that love, that unique expression of love that we are, and we can act on it in whatever unique ways we are meant to in our own particular lifetime. All right, so another question. Where do we find the soul voice meditation? So I've written about the soul voice meditation since my first book, Reveal. Reveal came out, I think, in 2013. And I have also an entire appendix at the end of Mary Magdalene Revealed that's just explicitly dedicated to a description of the soul voice meditation. And then I've also recorded it's about a 20-minute sort of practiced, guided soul voice meditation that you can get on my website. It just is, as soon as you sign up for sermons or emails, updates, you get sent this recording, and it's about a 20-minute guided general introduction to the soul voice meditation. What's written here in the appendix of Mary Magdalene Revealed is also a little bit about the history of how I started practicing it and how I was inspired, as I mentioned before, from the Hesychus, and really wanted to find a way to be in the world in the way that they were, where they were in constant dialogue with the divine through the heart, and where, you know, for me as a single mom, when I started practicing it, I could, you know, the Hesychus were renunciants. They were desert fathers, male monastics. And so they didn't have all of the intensity of the modern world, living in a city or being a single mom and, you know, needing to make money and support my child and exist in the world in a very physical, present way. And so the soul voice meditation evolved for me into a practice of really merging to kenosis, to that kenotic path that my studies in early Christianity and my studies with these gospels that were excluded from the Bible really indicate these early Christians were practicing, of releasing the ego and returning to the heart. And that really is the purpose of the soul voice meditation, is anytime you really feel caught up in something that's oppressing you, including yourself, whenever you feel that sense of becoming aware that you are existing elsewhere, right? You're experiencing a death, you know, you're awakening to the fact that you are not in this moment. You're not even maybe in this body. You are off somewhere else. The power of that is the power of that meditation is that perpetual return. And the practice of it is to get better and better at not judging the realization, right? That we're trapped in the ego somewhere, you know, or that we're off in the past or we're off in the future. The practice is really about non-judgment. the practice is about loving ourselves as we love others. So many of us have no issue with showing profound compassion to a stranger, but cannot extend that same compassion to ourselves. So the practice of the soul voice meditation is to integrate it as much as possible all throughout the day. But you can just start with maybe just before you go to bed, or just as you're waking up, or as you're brushing your teeth. And it's that that practice of embodiment, really, because how can we hear the heart if we're not actually present in the body? How can we know what it is that we already know if we are so caught up in everybody else's expectations of us, or everybody else's projections of who we need to be? It's an anchor, really, which is part of why Mary's cross has always been so profound to me. That image that I found in the south of France, with the heart anchored and the faith anchored deep, deep within this human body, this one particular lifetime, being anchored again and again in the heart. So another question, the Lectio Divina, it's pronounced in different ways depending on the country, but yes, it's Lectio Divina. And that is as I mentioned, the practice of meditating on a particular passage, really using it as a way to open up deeper understanding. And at the heart of that practice is simply reading it again and again, sometimes just meditating on one aspect of a passage. So for example, all exists through love, like just focusing on that and just repeating that again and again until new understanding arrives, by sitting with it and by praying. The formal Lectio Divina has 5 parts, with reading it, formally studying it, praying, meditating, having contemplation, which to me, I sort of roll all of those into one, with prayer, meditation, and contemplation, just by going inward with a passage and repeating that passage in the heart. And then the last is action. So allowing that passage to somehow inform our current questions or our current issues that have arisen. And somewhere within the meditating on a passage, or maybe you want to take a passage from Mary chapter 7, one of the aspects that we covered, one of the passages, like how wonderful you are. Maybe you just want to focus on that, how wonderful you are. And just taking that one little snippet and repeating it again and again and again, and it works like medicine. It feeds the soul, these words, these passages, it feeds the soul. And at the end of it, there's a diamond that's formed, from that concentration, from that meditation and contemplation. There's a diamond that's formed, a new realization or a deeper understanding of the passage. Okay, let's take one more question. How can I encourage more men to be open to the teachings of the divine feminine through Mary? So I think that this applies no matter what sex, gender, orientation someone is. I think what's really important is that emphasis that I mentioned before, that we can't help anyone else awaken. We can't help anyone else arrive at an experience of love. They have to have that encounter inwardly. I feel that, for myself, one of the most powerful examples for me is simply modeling what it is and what it has done for my life, for my own sense of healing and wholeness and completion, to be able to integrate not just the teachings of Christ or the words of Christ, but also the words of Mary, not just the teachings of Paul and what he has to share, but also the teachings of Thecla, not just the teachings of the various men and saints and gurus throughout time that so many of us have heard about, but also, those female saints and poets and mystics that have existed and are at the core of the Divine Feminine Oracle. And why I wanted to create it is that aspect of our being has been silenced, has been buried, has not been considered as worthy. And it's a detriment to all of humanity to not have both, to not have the male and masculine and light and mind, and also the dark and the feminine and the body embodiment. We need both equally. And we, I think, lead others most just simply through our own example, through our genuine work in the way that we genuinely and authentically feel transformed by this material. I believe that, the response to Mary Magdalene Revealed is a really profound indicator of just how ready every sex is for this work, every gender. The responses that I received and the comments, hundreds and hundreds of comments have flooded in after Mary Magdalene was revealed, and so many of them are from men. So many of them are from the LGBTQ community. So many of them are for those of us who are aware of the soul and do not want to be limited in any way because of how we appear physically, and want to be able to express our soul fully and live our soul fully. So that time absolutely has arrived, and that time is now. And this community, which makes me so incredibly proud and so deeply grateful that there is this level of response, and that we each are interested in experiencing and knowing gnosis, this love within us, so that we might act on it and be it in the world, be in service of that love. The fact that we are now aware of these texts and these scriptures gives me just profound hope and elation about what's next. So, all right, the last question is that several people missed the passages from the Gospel of Philip, and that is, so let me close by reading those two passages one more time to all of us, and then we will be at the close of this first class of What Mary Knew by Heart. And I hope that every one of us will be mindful this week of practicing the soul voice meditation at some point. Give love to yourself if you don't. And think about this wider community, how many of us have been through so much the past couple of years, and practice giving love when you're in the soul voice meditation to all of us who are connected through this work. and who have signed up to be a part of this collective right now to know what Mary knew by heart. So I will end with these two passages from the Gospel of Philip. Love refuses nothing and takes nothing. It is the highest and vastest freedom. All exists through love. What you say in a body. You can say nothing outside this body. You must awaken while in this body, for everything exists in it. Resurrect in this life. Thank you.